Yes, sir.
Okay, good. First of all, before I get started, thanks, Leno, for that introduction. Got to give a shout out to my beautiful wife. I saw her face on here a second ago. She usually don't have her face on here, but I love you, babe. So just wanted to give you a quick shout out before I got started. So as what inspired this lesson actually is my wife. It was actually going to be called something different. I actually was going to call this lesson, "Why Don't You Listen?" And the reason is because probably about a month or so ago after church, I was either changing out of my dress clothes or fixing some lunch. And I heard my wife say something that she says somewhat often to my daughter. She said, "Why don't you listen?" So obviously my daughter was being her 4-year-old self, and my wife told her to do something, and she did either what she wanted to do or the complete opposite of what she wanted to do. And me being in an extra spiritual frame of mind because I was just out of church that day, it made me think, well, did she not listen? Or is it this, should the question be, why don't you obey? And I thought about it and I couldn't really come to a true answer on which one was which, because I kind of thought they played the same, but they were different. So we'll see. Hopefully by the end of the night, I can make a little sense of it. But this theme, counterfeit Christianity, I think helps play into kind of the inspiration for this lesson, or at least the scripture reference. Definitely not calling my wife counterfeit Christian or my daughter counterfeit Christian, since she's not a Christian yet. She has not been baptized. But with that being said, when we think about a counterfeit, usually the first thing, there we go. Okay, so the first thing we usually think about when we think about counterfeit is money, right? And we know that if something is counterfeit, that just means it's fake or it's fraudulent, right? And the biggest problem with a counterfeit isn't necessarily that the item is fake. The biggest problem is the deception they're trying to pass off that fake item as being authentic. Because we know something that's authentic is the complete opposite of something that's counterfeit, because something authentic is genuine or real, right? So we kind of mix these two in right here, as you say, see fake in the middle of this word authentic here. But here's, I think, the problem that we can get to sometimes. We get to this place where we kind of put fake and genuine in the same category, or they're at a crossroads where they kind of come to this point and meet and intersect. And that's so not true. It's actually the total opposite. They are on total opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Kind of like this right here. You're on one side or you're on the other. There is no middle ground here in this photo. There's no middle ground when it comes to either being authentic or when it comes to being counterfeit, right? So one of these sides get pulled, they're just gonna be dead. It's killed. It is no middle ground for there to exist, these two commingling. So that's where we are when we think about it. And when I think about this theme of counterfeit Christianity, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I read that the way federal agents are trained to spot counterfeit money is not by studying a bunch of fake money. That's not how they're trained. They're trained to spot counterfeit money by being so thoroughly immersed and tested on what the real money or the real currency is, that as soon as a counterfeit comes, they automatically know it's not real, which actually makes sense when you think about it, because if there's a whole bunch of different counterfeits and none of them are legit, you can have probably hundreds of different counterfeits. So if you just going by the look, feel, or whatever of that, then it's kind of hard to get a baseline. But they have a baseline and they know the real currency so good that they know, okay, if this is a counterfeit, they can just tell like that off the top, right? So that's how they tell what counterfeit is, right? Because the real thing feels the exact same way every single time. That's the same thing with Christianity, right? God knows what real Christianity is because he created it. God doesn't have to study a whole bunch of counterfeit Christians to say, oh, what does a real Christian look like? He doesn't have to. He wrote the book on it. So while counterfeit Christians can usually fool other people, they can't fool God. So since God sits as the judge, the jury, and the executioner, it's important for us to conform to his definition of Christianity and not a counterfeit definition of Christianity. Right? So here's the text for tonight. Let's see if I can move my box because it's right on top of my text. There we go. Okay, so Luke 6:46 through 47, and it reads, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like." So that's all I'm going. Now, you can continue reading this through the end of the chapter, and this is talking about the parable of the foolish builders, which we've all heard, but I'm just going to stick right here for the purposes of this lesson tonight, because tonight, as you saw from the first slide, we're talking about practice, right? We're talking about practice under this umbrella of being an authentic and not a counterfeit Christian. So verse 46, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say?" Now, this is Jesus speaking here. These are Jesus's words when you look at it in the text. And what he's saying is the term Lord means master, which means you're giving me a term of respect, but with the way you act, you're not really showing me any respect. You're calling me in a respectful manner, but you don't respect me. So Jesus is basically saying that's just some counterfeit stuff right there. Verse 47 says there's 3 requirements. So you must come to him, you must hear his words, and you must practice those words. Sorry about that. So it's 3 requirements if we're going to be an authentic Christian. You have to come, you have to hear, and you have to practice. And is the conjunction word, something we learned probably back in the 2nd or 3rd grade, which means you have to take everything together for it to be complete. Right? And this is what I was kind of talking about in verse 46, kind of the Rodney Dangerfield. You get no respect, right? You call me with respect, but you're not really respecting me, right? So let's talk about this come part, right? First, we have to come. Come means you have to be in his presence and present yourself in a respectful manner before him. That's how you're supposed to come to Christ. The Greek word, one of the Greek translations for this word in the Bible actually is used here, means to become, which means to grow to be, to change, or to develop. So 2 things happen when we come to Christ. One, we are with Christ, or we be with Christ, and then, or become present with Christ, and then we become like Christ. So we're with Christ, we're present with Christ, and we become like Christ, right? So the problem with counterfeit Christians sometimes is they have the tendency, well, I'm gonna say me, I'm gonna call myself out. If sometimes in my life, I can sometimes have the tendency to live as if God isn't present at all times, right? Like I think about those things I used to sneak and do when I got home after school, when my parents weren't around because I could get away with it. Like they said, don't drink any of the Kool-Aid. I was like, if I just drink this much, they ain't gonna know, right? They ain't sitting here measuring the Kool-Aid, so I can have me a little bit of Kool-Aid, like a little bit of half a cup or something like that. They said, hey, don't turn on the TV until the homework's done. Well, they're not gonna be home at 6. I don't have that much homework tonight, so I can watch a show because, back then we didn't have DVR. So if you missed the show, you just missed it, right? There wasn't no, on demand and stuff like that. So, turn the TV on and, do my homework later. Little things like that, couldn't talk on the phone to my girlfriend until I finished the homework. Well, you sneak, make that phone call, right? Because you're like, whatever, I can talk for a little bit. I have time because I could get away with it. She would never really know if I did any of that stuff. But that's counterfeit stuff. And that's how we sometimes live our Christian lives right now, right? I act different in front of my church friends or with my church friends. Counterfeit stuff. I act different when my spouse is around than I do when my spouse isn't around. Counterfeit stuff. I'm a good dad in public, right? But at home, I'm the worst father ever. I don't spend no time with my kids. I don't do anything with them. Counterfeit stuff, right? The problem is God is always there. So we can think we might be fooling somebody, but we're not fooling God when it comes to that. I chose this photo right here for a reason, because it kind of reminds me of me and my daughter. My daughter looked like she's probably about the size of this girl here. But she's, ever since she was 2, she likes just getting on my back and me walking her around the house or riding her around the house on my back. And it's crazy because now she's 4. I'm like, girl, you heavy. I mean, you ain't 2 years old anymore, but she'll probably be trying to do it when she's 6. But anyway, she likes doing that, right? But when I'm with my kids, you see this guy right here, how he's holding his daughter. There's no phone in his hand. There's nothing else going on with him. He has his daughter and he's holding on to her very tightly, right? Because he's making sure that the most important thing at that moment is, 1, staying connected to her, and 2, not dropping her. Because if she falls, she's probably going to hurt herself, right? When I'm carrying my kids, it's the same way. I'm super focused. I'm like, the most important thing is staying connected, because I want to get them back to a place of safety and put them down safely. As Christians, that's how we should be with our Father. My daughter would do this all day, every day if I let her. She would be on my back, connected with me, playing with me, engaged and focused and present with me if I allowed her to be. God would love for us to do that to him. He wants us to be connected to him. He wants us to want to have this relationship where we want to be in his presence and being connected to him all the time. When we become Christians, that really should be our main objective. Our main objective should be to stay connected with Christ at all times. Counterfeit Christians aren't trying to spend time, and counterfeit Christians aren't trying to stay connected, right? But to become like Christ, if we're going to become like him, we have to spend the time getting to know him and trying to be like him. But due to us being created in a sinful nature, that takes a lot of practice on our end. Next, it says that we are to hear, right? Now, the word here is the Greek translation for akoye, which means to hear and to listen. Because as we know, there's a difference between hearing and listening. So when Jesus is saying this, he's actually saying, listen, don't just hear, don't just do the object of, if you've been blessed with, to have your hearing sense, to just hear me, right? Because hearing is involuntary. Most people can hear, but listening is intentional. Listening takes some action on your end for it to be properly executed. 2 essential skills of being a good listener are being present. Sounds familiar? We were just talking about coming and being present with God and presenting yourself to God in the right way. Being present is essential to being a good listener. That just means, eliminating all distractions and focusing on what the other person is trying to communicate to you. The second thing that's important to become a good listener is you have to stop talking, right? You cannot be talking when the other person's talking. If you are talking, the other person is not finishing their sentences before you're trying to communicate your point. You on your phone, you looking around, you're not really paying attention to the person, you're not present, and you're talking over them, then you're not listening. You're just trying to communicate or do what you want to do, or what you're thinking, what you have to say is more important than what that person has to say. But let me tell you this, what you have to say is not more important than what God has to say, ever, right? So if you haven't, and guess what, if you haven't heard his commands, then you can't listen to his commands, which means you can't properly follow his commands. If we're truly listening to what God has to say, there will be an intellectual and emotional response to it. And here's the thing, we're all listening to something. All of us are listening to something. So the question is, who or what are you listening to? And since we just said listening is intentional, whatever you're listening to, whether it be God or something else, it's a choice. It's an actual choice that you're choosing to do. So listening to God requires us to be present with him. We're commanded to come, be present, and hear and listen. And hearing God's voice takes practice. It does. There's not been a whole lot of times that I can honestly say that I really clearly heard God's voice in my life. The only time that I can say I did that were when my actions were intentional and I was focused on what he was trying to tell me. And then when I did that, I was able to listen, hear clearly, listen, and follow what he commanded me to do. So now it says practice. So we have to put the words into practice, right? Practice simply means obeying God. That right? That's simply obeying, practicing. You can probably use those two interchangeably, right? But the question comes, why don't we obey? When I think about, with my wife telling my daughter, why don't you listen? The question is, why don't we obey? And there are a lot of reasons we don't obey, but 3 reasons that I could really think of why we don't obey is, one, we don't care about or we don't fear the consequences, right? Why do you think atheists don't become Christians? Because they're not scared of hell. I actually heard an atheist on TV saying that it was, I don't know how he got on TV on some commercial. And I think I was maybe watching CNN or something. But he's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm an atheist and I'm not scared to burn in hell or something like that, he said. You don't fear the consequences. So he's not going to obey God until something changes in his life to make him fear those consequences. Sometimes another reason we don't obey is because the consequences aren't immediate. I know for me in my own life, especially when I was a lot younger, you feel like you have all these years left to live. You like, man, I'll get it right one day. I don't have to worry about that right now, right? We feel like hell is far off and we got all these years left. But as we get older, we should know better and know, hey, tonight, it could be my last night talking to y'all, right? So I need to be every day intentional about my obedience to God. And sometimes we don't obey because the consequences just aren't harsh enough, right? We don't, the consequences for us messing up, okay, whatever, I'll take that punishment, right? Think about back to, when I was a kid, depending on what the punishment was, probably might have depended on how obedient I was to my parents. Can't go outside this weekend. Okay, it's cool, whatever. It's cold anyway. So, it just depends on what the consequences are. But those are some reasons that we don't necessarily obey. But here's the importance of obedience, though. The importance of practicing, because obedience to God is an expression of our love to God. John 14:15, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. So obedience is a true test of love and our authenticity as Christians. But how do we get there? Usually we start with fear and mature to the respect and love portion of obedience. And I think about back to my childhood. When I was a child, I obeyed because my parents didn't play. I knew my parents they'll get my behind if I messed up, right? So it was just fear. Me personally, I ain't like getting my behind with. My sister, on the other hand, obviously she didn't care because she did whatever she wanted to when she wanted to. But for me, I ain't like getting hit with a belt. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do what I had to do because I don't like that punishment, right? But now it's the difference. If my mom or dad ask me to do something, to tell me to do something, I'll obey because of the relationship. I'll obey because I respect them. I'll obey because I love them. I don't want to embarrass them, right? I don't want to call shame on the family name. I don't want to disappoint them. So that's how we should grow to our obedience when it comes to God, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Obedience is better than not obeying, but obeying for the right reason is much better. So even if we're not obeying for the right reason, it's still better to be obedient, right? Because I'll be honest, I don't always obey for the right reasons. If I'm gonna be transparent with y'all, for me, you know, pandemic online worship, it really spoiled me, right? I was used to, man, getting service in for 2 hours. And before that, I never really had a problem going to the building. I never had a problem with, hey, this is the Lord's day, this is what we do. But I got so used to, for a year and a half or so, church being done in 2 hours, right? You're not having to leave, burn no gas, that I'm not gonna lie, I got spoiled. And I still go to church now since we've opened back up. I'm at the building, but I'm not gonna lie. Some mornings I get up on Sunday and there's no good reason whatsoever. And I just be like, man, I just want to stay at home and do church today. Now I get up and do it. I get up and go, right? But the point is, I'm obeying, not necessarily because I want to, right? Not necessarily for maybe even the right reasons. It's just like, okay, I know this is what God would have me to do. And I have to give God the same respect or even more respect than I give every other areas of my life. I go to work every single day, right? And for me, those are 10-hour days average, right? Some days more, right? And that's 5 days a week. That's not even one day a week. Like the 6 hours, if you count the travel time to and from worship service versus the 2 hours in the pandemic, I do that 5 days a week. Why do I do it? Not because I want to or I necessarily like to, but I got a family to feed. I got to keep a roof over our head. So I do what I have to do, right? Same thing with my diet. I eat healthy. I'm not gonna lie, not because I want to. I mean, it tastes all right, but it don't taste as good as the stuff that I really want to eat every single day. But I do it because it's healthy. It's better for me. I exercise, right? There's other things I can be doing during the week, except for that exercise. The hours I put in exercise, I can really be doing other things. But I do it because I feel like it's the right thing to do, even when I don't want to do it. So I have to give that same respect to God, and God is asking for obedience. So whether I want to do it or not, the point is I need to do it, right? But the thing is, obedience, it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of practice to get to the point where you're obedient more consistently than you're not obedient. And I think God has a few questions when he's evaluating our authenticity as a Christian, right? Or seeing if we are counterfeit Christians. And it's all in the text I just read. It's have you come, right? Are you spending time with me? Are you becoming more like me? Are you doing the things that I'm asking you to do? Have you come, truly come to me? Are you listening, right? Do my words and commands move you to an emotional response? Are you listening and are you practicing, right? Are you working on your obedience to me? Trying to get better every single day, right? It takes a lot of practice to move from being counterfeit to being authentic. And as I conclude, I know this will make Carlos smile, maybe some of my other Bay Area people smile on this one. Y'all boy Steph Curry here, right? One of my favorite quotes is, don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong, right? And that's a great quote, right? But that quote doesn't mean that you have to be perfect or that you will never get it wrong. What it's simply saying is give it all you have so it becomes so natural for you to get it right. That's what it means. That's what it means when it says practice until you get it right. Don't practice until you get it right. Practice till you can't get it wrong. Because getting it right one time might be an anomaly. But if you practice until you can't get it wrong, then that becomes the norm, right? But Steph Curry here, to me, hands down, not even arguable. A lot of stuff in sports are arguable, but it's not even arguable to me that he's the greatest shooter in NBA history. And it's said that in the offseason, he makes 500 shots a day in the offseason and about 250 to 350 during the season, depending on, where you read. Now, I just said he makes that many shots, not takes that many shots. So he doesn't make every single shot he takes. So obviously there's probably another 100 to 200 shots that he's missing somewhere in there. But practice is important to him. Because when it's game time, he wants that shot to roll off his fingers and feel natural. There's not too many shots in the game, except for maybe a full court heave, to try to beat the buzzer, that Steph Curry takes that he hasn't practiced. Shots that would be bad shots for pretty much almost anybody else in the NBA are good shots for him because he practiced it, right? But this is where we can be encouraged as Christians, right? When sometimes we might get down on ourselves or think of ourselves as counterfeit Christians. When Steph Curry misses a shot, has a bad game, or he's in a shooting slump, that does not mean he's a bad shooter. It just means he's not shooting well at that time. No one would say, oh, Steph missed a shot, he can't shoot. He's still the best shooter in the game, regardless, even if he go 5, 6, 10 games with not shooting up to his standard, right? Now, I'm gonna tell you one thing that I'm pretty confident, even though I've never met or talked to Steph Curry. When he misses shots or he's going into a slump, he doesn't lose confidence. And I guarantee you that he still goes to practice. I guarantee you that he's still practicing his shot because I know he knows eventually that he's going to get back on shot, get back on track, and he knows he's the greatest shooter in the game. And he's confident that the next time he shoots it is going in every single time. Counterfeit Christians aren't in the gym getting up shots, right? They're not practicing, right? Like they're supposed to. They're not. So for them, getting it wrong is normal. But for authentic Christians, they're in the gym not just getting up shots, they're getting up makes. They're getting up successful shots. Their practice is on point. So for them, getting it right is normal, right? So yeah, we are talking about practice, right? We're talking about practice because we're talking about obedience, because counterfeit Christianity is not a game. The lesson is yours. Thank you.